Catskill Visitor Center with the invasive species specialists from CRISP, Dan Snyder-Nerp and Sarah Coney, and they're going to answer some interview questions today about invasive species. So let's get started. So my first question is, what are the most common invasive species in our area of the Catskills, both terrestrial and aquatic? I guess we can start with Sarah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So I mean, it kind of varies depending on what area you're in. Things up north in like Otsego County differ a little bit from down here in Ulster or Sullivan County. But I would say some of the most common aquatic plants and animals are curly leaf pondweed, Eurasian water milfoil, unfortunately water chestnuts becoming more common. And then as for animals, I would say things like mystery snails, some rusty crayfish are invasive crayfish species, or carp. Carp are actually considered invasive.
What about terrestrial?
Well, it depends on which part of the region or which part of the state you're talking about, but the most common and maybe most obvious are Japanese knotweed is probably the biggest one, also one of the hardest ones to get rid of. Common mugwort is another really common one. Oriental bittersweet, Japanese barberry are all over the place in the Catskills. As far as insects go, the most common, highest profile one here is probably Hemlock woolly adelgid, but that's a lot less pervasive in the northwest Catskills.
So I have a lot of questions about the spotted lanternfly in the survey I sent out earlier this year. Do you have any answers about that, or how to recognize it? I know there's some similar species to it. Do people kill them or report them, or what happens when you find one of those?
Yeah, that's fairly recently introduced and spreading really fast. It really loves to crawl into cryptic, hard to find areas, and it can lay its eggs on anything hard and rigid, so it's happy to grab a ride on your car or truck or trailer as you drive around and then hop off. So it's really good at starting satellite populations. It doesn't have that many lookalikes. It's a pretty striking insect across all its life stages. You might confuse the egg sacs with spongy moth egg sacs, but as they age, the differences become pretty stark. And once they hatch, the instars are early instars are black and white spotted, and then they turn really striking red, white, and black spotted. And the adults are pretty sizable, inch and a quarter long, with really beautiful yellow, black, and white markings and a pink body. Pretty hard to confuse with other species. And yeah, unfortunately, they are moving through the CRISP region pretty quickly. The best thing people can do for when they see spotted lanternfly is report it with any invasive species. There's an official statewide database called IMAP Invasives, which is free for anyone to join. They don't spam you with anything. You're not signing up for, having your information stolen or anything like that. And it's, maybe 15 seconds to send an observation for an invasive species into IMAP Invasives. And all that data goes to one place, and it's used by researchers, professionals like us across the state. Folks at DEC, DEP use it to inform their management work every year. And that's probably the most important thing you can do when you see spotted lanternfly or any invasive species, is report it. As far as killing spotted lanternfly, go for it. If you find it, just get a picture first and then upload it to IMAP.
Is IMAP a website or an app?
Oh, yeah.
It's both.
Oh,
so
okay.
There's a browser portal that you can go in. That's, in my experience, a little easier sometimes. But it does have an app that's completely free to download and use. And you can make reports right from the app.
All right, perfect. So what are the most noticeable invasive species, and what are some less noticeable ones that people should look out for but might not know are invasive?
Well, I mentioned it before, but Japanese knotweed is one of the most noticeable and most common species throughout the Catskills. It loves to grow in wet places, along riparian corridors, along streams and rivers and creeks, and it just completely takes over, shades out every other species, native or non-native. that's shorter than it and just takes over riverbanks. Oriental bittersweet is pretty easy to spot no matter where you go in the Catskills as you're driving along roadsides. Wild parsnip, when it's in bloom, you'll see these 4 to 6 foot tall fields of yellow flowers in abandoned fields and lots. That's pretty common around here. For less noticeable ones, spotted lanternfly, like I said, it's pretty cryptic. You gotta look under rocks and under logs, underneath the siding on houses, that kind of thing, for the eggs. Mile-a-minute vine is one of the what we call early detection rapid response species for crisp, and that's got some small patches throughout the area.
Aquatic, I mean, for the most part, people don't really pay attention to the seaweed in their lakes until it becomes a problem. So usually the ones that people notice somewhat quickly are things like Eurasian water milfoil, starry stonewort, water chestnut, European frogbit, things that really get in the way of recreation. Unfortunately, when people do start to notice them and then start impeding recreation, it's a little late to start dealing with them. Unfortunately. So for the lesser known species, anything that's newly introduced, there are a number of species like hydrilla or water soldier or fishhook flea that when they're first introduced, the populations are so small that you don't see them. So they're very easily overlooked, and then people don't start noticing them until they become a problem, and management becomes very difficult. For a more, I guess, basic answer, the ones that are the most easily missed aquatic invasive species are usually small invertebrates and some form of larval stage that are microscopic. And that's how zebra mussels and other invasive bivalves get around easily.
Right. So how do these species affect our ecosystem? I know you said already it affects recreation.
Yeah, so the definition of an invasive species is any non-native plant or animal or pathogen that causes harm to the environment, the economy, or human health. So it only has to do one of the three, but overall most invasive species, when they come, they outcompete our native species or harm the native species, while they don't fulfill the same ecological niche as whatever species they're outcompeting. So with like honeysuckle, they produce a lot of berries, maybe I think of autumn olive. They produce a lot of berries, but they're not as nutritional for our native birds as compared to like a native serviceberry or something. So it seems like it might be a good thing providing food for birds, but overall it's a negative.
Right.
So we covered recreation and environment. On the terrestrial side, there are a couple of invasives that are a potential threat to human health as well. The big ones are wild parsnip and giant hogweed. Unfortunately, wild parsnip is very common. Fortunately, it is a little less dangerous. They both have the same kind of effect, where the sap of the wild parsnip and giant hogweed can interact with human skin and basically cause you to have the worst sunburn of your life, like a hospital visit sunburn.
I have a good scar on my leg from wild parsnip, and that's not nearly as bad as giant hogweed.
Yeah, they're really gnarly. Giant hogweed, the sap is so dangerous. If it gets in your eyes, it can affect your eyesight. Nasty plants, and like I said, wild parsnip is unfortunately a little more common.
Are there any invasive species that pose a greater threat than others in New York State? If so, what are they? So you already mentioned those two. They're greater than obviously others. Are there any others that you can think of?
I would say we're lucky with aquatics. There really isn't anything that can physically harm you. If you're unlucky enough to step on a water chestnut nutlet, or if you grab water soldier, that might hurt, but there aren't any horrible UV activated toxic chemicals, luckily. But there are ones that we are definitely really concerned about for recreational purposes or the environment. One of the biggest ones in New York that we're concerned about is hydrilla, also called water thyme is its common name. And as of right now, there are no known populations in crisp. However, there have been a few introductions in New York State, and those are very highly managed. just because of how big of a threat hydrilla is to our water bodies. It grows incredibly quickly and just can fill up a water column. So it would not only impede recreation, because you can't really drive a boat through really thick weeds. If you've ever tried to drive a motorboat through it, it does not work. It's not even fun to kayak through them sometimes. Swimming, no, because I know I don't like things touching my legs under the water, so nobody likes that. But so it really impedes recreation. It brings down home values on lakes. Eurasian water milfoil is another species that has similar, and it's been documented that property values take a dive when that's documented.
How would something like that spread from one lake to another lake?
So unfortunately, the biggest vector for aquatic invasive species in really anywhere are motorboats or other watercraft. Kayaks and canoes are just as capable of transporting them, any gear. But for the most part, it's trailered boats. As you're pulling them out from the launch, things get caught up between the boat and the trailer. And unfortunately, with hydrilla and a lot of these invasive plant species, it takes a very small piece to survive a short trip from one lake to another to establish a whole new population.
So definitely clean off your boats before you go into another lake.
If you've never heard clean, drain, dry, look it up. That is the mantra that we live by in New York as far as aquatic invasive species. New York has a fantastic program with watercraft inspection stewards at a lot of the public boat launches that are there to help people clean, drain, dry, and learn about aquatic invasive species.
Another aquatic invasive species that I saw kind of prominent on your annual report, because I did read that, is the fishhook water fleet, a nuisance for fishers. And can you speak a little bit about where they can be found and how they are transported as well?
Yeah, unfortunately this is a new introduction. It was first found in the Papacton Reservoir by anglers. It's a very small, like smaller than your fingernail, clear invertebrate. So individuals are very hard to see with the naked eye. However, when most people are seeing them is when anglers, especially for like deep water game fish or like lake trout, if they're trolling, they have the long lines in the water. They get caught up on those lines and kind of gunk them up. So when you pull them out, you see these like weird spiky jelly masses on your lines. So that's how most people see them, and so it does get in the way of fishing. We're not quite sure what impacts it might have on the ecology of the reservoir, given how reservoirs are, they're drawn down. So there's not like a thriving ecosystem in them for the most part. But they're in other lakes, like Lake Champlain, where they have been introduced and have been studied for a few years, they have been some impacts on the food web. Unfortunately, small, especially like juvenile fish, will eat these invertebrates, will eat the fishhook water flea, or there's another one called spiny water flea. They're very similar. And they can't really digest like the spikes and everything, or they can't, so they end up feeling full, but they're not. So it can detrimentally affect development in some fish species that they eat.
So other than reporting and killing if they are able to, what should a common person do if they see any of these invasive plants or animals, and how can the community help in preventing the spread of these invasive species?
Well, like you just said, and like we said earlier, reporting on IMAP invasives is the best thing you can really do. There are free trainings throughout the state. CRISP and the other prisms all provide free IMAP invasives trainings. The New York Natural Heritage Program also hosts free trainings, webinars, and in-person ones that anyone can go and become as skilled with IMAP invasives reporting as you could possibly want. The trainings usually feature some common invasive species ID training as well. You can also contact your Cornell Cooperative Extension or your local PRISM if you have questions about invasive species, if you need help IDing something. The PRISMs and the Extension offices are also really great resources for potential help with planning, or sometimes even financial assistance, depending on the species and location.
And then, in general rule, just plant native. Like we have our native pollinator garden behind. It's just better for the ecosystem. You're not potentially introducing invasive species through horticulture, because unfortunately some cultivars of more common invasive species are still sold, and they're not always as sterile as we would like. Plus, they're not providing the same benefits for the ecosystem as if you planted like a button bush or something native. So really recommend planting native if you're into gardening.
Yeah. So what methods are currently being used by professionals to control or eradicate these invasive species?
So on the terrestrial side, we basically use any tool available to us to manage invasive plants and insects. In CRISP, I always try to use the methods that lead to the least disturbance and least risk to the surrounding plants and insects as possible. So we will usually start with mechanical management of some kind, hand pulling or digging, depending on the size of the infestation and the species. Some species just don't respond well to it. We will use chemical methods in some cases. Herbicides and insecticides are, there are risks to it. There's always risks to it. You can never make it 100% safe, but we take every precaution we can to limit the exposure to just the target invasives that we're dealing with. And we use only very, very targeted applications. We're not out there with a broadcast sprayers, spraying acres of things. We're spraying individual plants or cutting a little tree down and getting the stump.
Right.
There are biocontrol methods that are being used for a lot of invasive plants and insects. Unfortunately, it is a long-term process. There's a lot of research that goes into biocontrols, which is a parasite or pathogen or predator of an invasive species that's intentionally introduced to reduce the invasive species population. One of the things that's required is they're target specific. So whatever you're releasing can only affect that specific invasive species.
Right.
And there's years and years of research that go into making sure that's the case. There's also research that goes into making sure it's even likely to reduce the population in a meaningful manner before it can be approved for release. There's some pretty interesting alternative methods being researched and really being offered in the US. Japanese knotweed has electrical control, where you take conductive plates and you zap the plant and it basically fries its cells.
Wow.
The research is still ongoing how effective it is, but it's pretty brand new in the US for Japanese knotweed at least.
Have you ever used fire control, or would that be too large scale for this area?
We are just looking into that this year. It can be really effective, both in the larger manner you're talking about and in very targeted plant-by-plant methods. So we're just looking into that this year, getting the training. But yeah, it can be very effective. Classical biocontrol things have to be target specific.
Right.
So there's a little bug we call Little Larry, Laricobius nigrinus, is a predator insect that feeds on the hemlock woolly adelgid insect, which attacks hemlock trees. And Little Larry only eats hemlock woolly adelgid. There's other adelgids that we have in New York, native and non-native. Little Larry won't touch him. It'll only eat the hemlock woolly adelgid. And so that's one of the requirements for classical biocontrol.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of control methods and ways to get rid of invasive species. So I noticed that you guys have a boot brush station, and I noticed a lot of hiking trails do as well. So how does this work, and how does it help to prevent the spread of invasive species?
So as Sarah just said, once something gets established, the longer you wait before management, the harder and harder it becomes to eradicate that species. And that goes the other way. The earlier you start management of something, the easier it is, the shorter time scale you're looking at. And that goes
less expensive.
And less expensive. And that goes all the way to prevention. That's the number one best method you have for managing invasive species. If you can stop something from getting into an area at all in the first place, it's 100% effective. and it's way cheaper than waiting for something to get introduced to an area and jumping on it then.
There's like any invasive species, anybody who works with invasive species knows the invasion curve. It's basically skyrockets after initial introduction.
Right.
So if it's not caught early enough, the problem just becomes so much bigger, between costs, manpower, and time.
Right.
And prevention ties into the boot brush stations. That's what they're there for.
Yeah.
They're there to stop people from potentially bringing in seeds caught in their boots, or other hiking gear. You can run other things through a boot brush. Either bringing things to trailheads or wherever the boot brush is installed, or bringing things back from the trail to wherever they're going after they're done hiking.
Could it ever be possible for an invasive species to become normalized or not invasive to the longer it stays in one area? Could it become not harmful to other species or not harmful to people eventually, the longer it stays in one area?
Not really, because you're extirpating those species it's competing with. So Otsego Lake, I do a lot of work up there. It's Cooperstown, the Baseball Hall of Fame. It's a beautiful lake, but unfortunately, because of its popularity, it has a number of invasive species introduced, including zebra and quagga mussels, which are cousins. They're both Dracaena genus, so I'll just call them dracenids to go on, or mussels. We also have native freshwater mussels, which are key parts of a lot of aquatic ecosystems by filtering water, stabilizing sediment, providing food sources for native species. And unfortunately, they are in direct competition with those zebra and quagga mussels. They are incredibly efficient filters. They don't get very big, but you see millions upon millions of them in one water body stacked on each other.
Right.
And unfortunately, the mussels could not compete with all of those zebra mussels, and they either starved to death or they were suffocated because they couldn't get oxygen because the zebra mussels were attaching to the native mussels themselves. And so unfortunately, we've seen the extirpation, which is the localized extinction of native mussels in Otsego Lake. And zebra mussels are not fulfilling the same niche. Quagga mussels were first found in 2020, and they have actually started to outcompete the zebra mussels. Zebra mussels can only attach to hard substrates. Quagga mussels will attach to hard substrates and can subsist in soft substrates like clams. So whereas part of the lake was colonized by zebra mussels, the entirety of Otsego Lake can be colonized by quagga mussels. And so since I started scuba diving in 2016-ish, visibility in Otsego Lake used to be, you'd be really lucky if you got like 8 feet of visibility. Now it's regularly 20 plus feet.
Wow.
Because of the quaggas. They can filter like 2 gallons of water a day per individual, and then you multiply that by however like billions are in there. That's a lot of filtering, and it's actually led to the first recorded harmful algal blooms in Otsego Lake. Because they are such efficient filterers, they're filtering out the green algae that they prefer to ingest and leaving the cyanobacteria, the blue-green algae that causes those harmful algal blooms with less competition. So overall, the introduction of just those 2 species has left Otsego Lake poorer for it. I don't think there'll ever be a time where it equalizes or something compensates. It's going to have a reoccurring harmful algal bloom program.
So I guess this leads me to my last question. What are your goals in the upcoming years that deal with invasive species?
So the overall goal of all our work is addressing as many populations of those early detection species as possible. For me, I've been working on giant hogweed since I started at CRISP, and it's like 60% of the sites that we've worked with are no plants growing for several years. So to officially declare eradication for giant hogweed, we actually wait 9 years before we declare it eradicated. So we visit the site 9 years after the last time we see the plant, and if it's not growing there, then we declare the site eradicated. So about 60% of our sites are in that 9-year period, and the rest are either 1 plant a year or down 84. I think the biggest one out in Roscoe is down like 84%.
Except for that one giant one every
Yeah.
year. But
So hogweed and Mile Minute Vine is the other really big one.
yeah, unfortunately we joke that invasive species are a growth industry because there's always something new, unfortunately. We do have some sites where we have been very successfully managing and reducing, but like Dan said, it can be a 10-year wait period before you can officially declare something eradicated. Water chestnut is one of the ones that I work with very often. We have some sites where we've either been seeing 2 or 3 plants and we pulled them before they produce nutlets, but those nutlets can stay in the seed bank for over a decade. So we have to continue monitoring for the next decade, because if they pop up and you miss just 2 or 3 plants one year, all of a sudden you have dozens upon dozens upon dozens the next year. So there are some sites that I'm very confident will reach eradication, just can't say that yet. The most hopeful one though is it's a really good example of EDRR. Yellow floating heart is an invasive pond ornamental. It was semi-intentionally introduced. And it's a small half-acre pond that it is just completely covered. Like there's almost nothing else growing except for yellow floating heart. And it's directly connected to a tributary in the Susquehanna. There's another lake up over the hill. So we've been working with partners at Otsego County Conservation Association on hand pulling and eliminating that. And I'm really happy that we got about half an acre done last year, or no, quarter of an acre in a half-acre pond. So about half of it done. It's slow going, hard work, but this is the one that I really do think we can eradicate. This is the only known population in crisp, so once we get rid of it, we're good.
Awesome. Yeah.